Kurt and Kim have actually been worshiping with us when they've been available, and they have come all the way from Okotoks to be with us this morning. And we're really grateful for all that means. Oh, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for opening scripture for us this morning.
So what you don't know about us is that this is a really typical thing to happen to the Peters. I don't know if this is on.
It's not yet.
It's not on yet. Okay.
Just keep persevering.
I will keep persevering. I will keep talking.
There.
All right. There we go. Yay. So what you don't know about us, the Peters, is that this kind of thing, the podium lectern thing happening, that happens to us all the time. That's just regular life. But we are so grateful to be here. We are so honored to be here. What you also don't know is that all of the IWs that were up here are like the superstars. We have so much respect and love for them, and we are so grateful that they are here too. It was really encouraging for us to be asked to come and be among them as well. And we are Kim and Kurt, and we are here for 6 months in Okotoks and neighboring districts. We have 3 kids. One of them is in Wales studying in university. The other one is actually here in Okotoks. He's going to be studying in an art school. And we have our youngest here with us, Isaiah, who looks just like his dad. And if you say, wow, you have 2 university kids, you look like you're still in university, I would say you're right. We do look that young. So we are living in Spain. I am an artist, and Kurt does stuff too.
Mm-hmm. I do, yes. The stuff that I do is a little harder to define, and so I won't go into all the details of that. There aren't that many details, to be honest. But it is good to be here as your new neighbors in Okotoks. I don't know what we call ourselves now. We just live wherever family lives, and Kim's parents and brother live in Okotoks, and so now we live in Okotoks. But I don't know what we call ourselves now. Maybe you guys can help me out. Is it Okotokans or Okotokians? Okotokians?
We just say moochers.
Yeah, that's much better.
For people. Yeah.
That's much better than what I thought it might be, which was Okidokians or something like that. Okotokians? Okay. We're one of you now. Thank you for welcoming us into your lovely town. And today we'd actually like to talk to you about our neighbors in Spain and about our neighbors around the world and about your neighbors and our responsibility, our collective responsibility to them as God's children. And we'll do this by focusing on what Jesus said and what he taught us about neighbors, starting with Luke 29. This is what it says. But an expert, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replies by telling the parable about the man who was beaten and robbed and left for dead. 2 people passed by and did nothing to help out. But one traveler comes along and takes pity on this wounded man, bandages him up, transports him, and actually even pays for the necessary extended care that he requires. And the hero of this story actually belonged to a people group that had a long history of mutual animosity with the other 3 characters mentioned in this parable. And Jesus asked the law expert, which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who was robbed by these villains? And the expert of the law replies, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, well, go and do likewise. There was a TV show a few years back, Mr. Rogers. Does anybody remember that? Maybe you were somebody. Brian, you remember? Okay, there was a song with that. Does anybody remember what that song was? It's a beautiful. Can we sing it together? No, I'm just kidding. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Maybe you were more Mr. Dress-Up People or Friendly Giant, I don't know. But we remember that song. And one of the lines in that song is actually, "It's a beautiful day for a neighbor." It's a beautiful day for a neighbor. And when we landed in Madrid 10 years ago, our plane was flying over the countryside. We were going over towns and cities, and we wondered about our future neighbors. Who were they going to be? Who were we going to be living beside? What town were we going to be living in? What city? And we were full of this optimism and deep faith about the new phase of missions life that we were entering. It really was a beautiful day for neighbors. But what were our initial impressions? We land in Spain, get out at the airport, and the first thing that I noticed was the faces of the people that worked there. They were dour, they were glum, they were angry. We later came to know, and maybe it's because they were just working at the airport, but we later came to know that and understand that Spaniards are actually quite friendly, and especially friendly once you gain their trust. Still, at the same time, we were noticing this deep sadness in their faces.
So I'm an artist, and as an artist, my job is to paint faces. So I notice faces a lot, and I love painting people. I really believe that God has called me to specifically paint people. But how does painting people be a witness for Him? When we first arrived, I had no idea what my art ministry would actually look like. So as it turns out, the Lord just kind of led me to be with artists. And I have kind of different circles of artist friends. So in Spain, in Madrid, I have a group of about 7 people with whom I spend a lot of time. And then there's the greater group of European artists, and then there's the international group that I work with. And I have had to earn their trust. And part of that is by being the best artist that I can be, and part of it is just by being a really good friend. Art ministry is spending time doing art, obviously, but viewing art, speaking art, sharing life with artists, and using my art to witness to the love of God. So what do? I translate art classes for my friends. I visit with them, we exhibit together, we learn from each other, we spend time walking and doing life together. And then there's the messy side of art ministry, which is competition between artists stealing from each other, stealing ideas and things, commissions that get stolen, backstabbing, mistrust, getting mocked for each other's beliefs in front of people. It is revenge and the darkest of the dark worlds of artistic concepts and themes that I step into. So as an artist ministering to other artists, I am a witness for Him using art as a launching pad, because art is like a public liturgy. We all participate in the experience of viewing, and I get one picture to tell a story. It might be a modern version of a Bible story, or just the image of a person who's made in the image of God, and use that as a way to start the conversation about who God is and who we are in Him. And one of the commonalities that we have with our Spanish neighbors is the basic experience of being human and living in a human body. And this is such an amazing thing. I love sharing this with my friends. We all know that we have 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, ears, right? Most of us would agree. If you look to your neighbor and look at them, there's something really cool that God has made. If you look at the person's pupils, you'll see that they actually line up with the corner of that person's mouth. If you look at their tear ducts, they will line up with the outside of the flare of the nostril. Everybody's ears basically line up with their eyebrows, the top of the ear. That is something that is common to every person, and yet we're all unique. How is that possible that we all have these same measurements, and yet you can recognize somebody just by looking at them because they're different, they're unique? So there are things like that I get to, with my artist friends, I get to share with them that human experience. But more than that, it's our longing for healing, for hope, for forgiveness, for reconciliation. And that's what art ministry is. It's pointing to God's desire for us to be reconciled to Him, body and soul, using art. And during this whole 3 years thing, I think some of you have heard of it, where there was this sickness that was going around and some of us had to stay in our homes. Well, Spain had one of the toughest lockdowns, I think globally. We were 10 weeks in our homes without being allowed out except for one person to go and get groceries. And during that time, there was a lot of texting going on with my artist friends, and we were, commiserating, and we're all in this together kind of thing. And I was saying, I'm there with you, we're suffering too, and it's hard. And I got the response from my artist friends that, you don't know what we're going through. You're Canadian. And I thought, well, that's funny, because I'm in the same city, under the same lockdown, the same rules, in the same country, and yet there was this distance that was put between me and my friends, that they did not want to acknowledge that we were suffering together, that there was a distance, there was that rejection.
There's this very Spanish characteristic or attitude, if you will, that's summed up in the expression, es lo que hay. Can we all say that together? Es lo que hay. You don't even know what you're saying, some of you. What? You should have waited until, okay, that's being very trustful of me, because what it means is it is what it is, or that's all there is. It's along that line, right? And it's an expression that's usually accompanied by a particular shoulder shrug. And it looks something like this. Es lo que hay, right? Es lo que hay. And that's all there is. It is what it is. Sometimes you go to a restaurant and you say, well, I'd like to have this on the menu. So, we don't have that. Oh, okay. Well, why not? Es lo que hay. That's all it is. That's all there is. Sorry about that. And as international workers there in Spain, and despite having permanent resident status now, we're still outsiders. We're still only guests. And that's okay. Es lo que hay. And we're not Spaniards. We're as much as we try to adopt the culture and understand the culture, we're still not Spaniards. But it means we have to carefully measure everything, our opinions on a lot of topics, especially topics of culture or politics, even if we disagree with how things are done. And of course, we do this without compromising our biblical values. And we do this making a choice to be bold in our faith in God. And if we're going to be rejected for anything, it should be because we follow Jesus, not because of our political opinions or our cultural differences, not because of our subjective views, not because of our need to be right on a certain topic, or because I won't support the Real Madrid soccer club. Are there any Real Madrid fans here? No, good. But my neighborhood is full of Real Madrid fans, and our walls are very thin, and when the big game is happening and somebody scores, the Real Madrid fans, they jump up and down. You can hear them yelling all through our neighborhood. When Barcelona scores, and that's my team, Isaiah and I, we cheer and we go, yay. We don't do any jumping up and down. So we are, after all, strangers and aliens, and as the Bible puts it, if you belong to the world, its people would love you. They would really love you, but you don't belong to the world. I have chosen you to leave the world behind, and this is why its people hate you. So let me tell you a little bit more about the spiritual reality of Spain. I'm just going to throw some facts and numbers at you very quickly here. Did you know that 10 million people live in towns without an evangelical presence? That there are 331 municipalities of more than 5,000 inhabitants with no evangelical church? And that there are more than 8,000 villages in Spain where 92% have no evangelical presence yet. And more than 10 million people in Spain live in places that have not been reached by the gospel. That, my brothers and sisters, is a lot of neighbors. And in so many ways, Spain has barely been reached with the gospel of Jesus. So please pray for Spain. Pray that they wake up to the historic and cultural lies that have blinded them for so many years. And you can get into the history of Spain, and there's so much to it. Okay, so I've mentioned my my impressions of Spain in 2012. It's the Peters thing happening again. We weren't supposed to say our last names, by the way. It's okay, now you know. So here are my impressions upon arriving in Canada this past June. We come and go. We haven't really been in Canada for more than a few months since 2012. First of all, let me say that globally, and you probably already know this, Canada is considered one of the most desirable places to live. In fact, in other parts of the world, I've been asked, why'd you leave Canada to come live here? And our dream is to go to Canada and live there. What are you doing here? And there really is a lot to like about Canada and its inhabitants. It's a beautiful country. Canadians are worldwide known as polite, friendly, helpful, always apologetic. And even our wildlife, as I found out here in Okotoks, make an effort to use the crosswalks. I witness this almost every evening here in Okotoks. But the world, and Canada included, have been through some very trying circumstances over the last few years. And Canada has some extra circumstances, maybe. And the crisis that we live with tends to bring out extremes. And at the risk of offending, here are some of my observations. And I know that we've been away for a while, but this is what I've experienced coming back to Canada. First of all, there seems to be higher levels of anxiety. There seems to be more anger and bitterness. There seems to be polarization, divisiveness, families that no longer talk to each other. We come back, what is happening here? And yes, I know that these things have always existed to one degree or another, and maybe they're existing more so now than in the past. But thankfully, since we've been here and seen these things, we've also witnessed many relationships restored. We've also seen relationships moving towards repairing and towards healing, and healing has started for some of these relationships. So back here in our home country of Canada, we do have more of a voice to express our opinions than we do in Spain on how things are run. And we have a right to fight for what we believe. That's something that is enshrined in our rights here in Canada. But whatever freedoms we might enjoy or are worried about losing, for those of us who are Christ's followers, they still must be exercised in the right spirit and with love, specifically in terms of loving our neighbors. Jesus understood the dynamics of this relationship and of any relationship, and emphasized that the entirety of the law and all of our relationships, with all the accompanying feelings and opinions that come along with them, were summed up in two statements. The first one, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You've heard this many times. You've heard a lot of teaching on this passage, but it's worth repeating. Loving your neighbor as yourself might sometimes be hard. If it was easy, God probably wouldn't have mentioned it multiple times in Scripture. So here we are.
So I have the top floor of our little townhouse. That's where I have my studio. And I have a little couch there, and I sit, and that's where I pray. And there was one morning where I was praying, and I was praying for all of my artist friends. And I'm a very visual person, so I asked the Lord, how should I see my artist friends? How should I see my neighbors? And so he gave me this wonderful image. And it was like I was working out what a single painting in my head would be of who Jesus would be sitting with, were he with me in my sphere, with my friends. And we were in a bar, and in Europe, bars are like cafes. So Jesus was sitting on a stool, and his back was turned. And I saw behind him was the bartender, and then I realized that bartender was me, and I had a cloth in my hand, and I was ready to wipe down the counter. And An artist friend of mine, who is a gay married man, was sitting at the end of the bar just listening to Jesus, unsure, with his husband beside him with his hand on the bar. To Jesus' immediate left was my friend who had his entire body tattooed, top to bottom, and pierced with both negative and positive piercings, implants and such. And he has giant holes in his body, but he was leaning in, but he was still leaving a little bit of space. On Jesus' right side was my friend who's a former red light district worker, completely enraptured by the Lord. She's weeping, clinging to his arm. Behind her was another one of my artist friends who was stealing something out of her bag, pretending to listen. To Jesus' extreme right was a very successful and wealthy artist friend of mine who is kind of on the fringes of the group, but his arm is being pulled and he's being lured away from Jesus' side by a figure representing the devil who's in the half-light. And I realized that this is my group. These are my neighbors, and Jesus wants to be with them all, and he is in the middle of all of this. So if you were to walk into an empty Starbucks or a Timmy's, and I have a son who's working at Tim Hortons now, it doesn't get more Canadian than that, who would be serving Jesus? Who would be watching him, asking him questions? Who is in your bar with Jesus? What if that is your kitchen? Who is in your circle of friends in your kitchen? Who lives close by? With whom do you speak? Who runs your groceries through the till at the Save-On? These are our neighbors, and how can we love them? How are you a part of their lives, and how can you serve them? How can you creatively speak about the nature of God, his plan, his heart, his mission?
How can you do this? Well, there is some good news. And we can do well in loving our neighbors as ourselves. There are many ways to practice this. First and foremost, our actions speak volumes. Our neighbors are waiting to see whether our lives actually authenticate what we have to say and what we believe. And one of our Spanish friends said to me one time, he says, "We're always watching you, even when you think that we're not." Last year, well, actually it was last January, the big storm Filomena came through, and it hit Spain really hard. Unprecedented snowfall in Madrid. Madrid is a place where maybe every couple of years you get a little dusting and it's gone in a couple of hours or even less. We were trapped on our street without being able to drive out for a whole week. That's how much snow fell. The eyes of the neighborhood were upon us, the Canadians. The resident experts in snow and cold weather. Yeah, I didn't grow up in Canada, and I grew up in tropical climes, and so I'm not a resident expert really. But we could almost hear the whispers coming from all the buildings around us. What are they going to do? Let's watch. And they did. The pressure was on, and we weren't prepared at all. The first thing we did, though, was we cleared this balcony that we have. We cleared it. It was up to about here. Looking, as you walked out, the snow was up to here. And so we cleared that, and we dumped that all out. And we just didn't want any flooding in case of a quick thaw. And one of our friends on the street, when they saw that we were removing snow, and they came up to us later, they said that everybody else started to copy us. And so everybody was taking snow, shoveling snow, not shoveling, but just throwing snow off of their balcony. And it's because they didn't have the right tools. I found an old garden spade, and it was probably from the Spanish Civil War or something, but it had the handle was just clinging on with a couple of rusty nails, and so we started to shovel steps, and we started to shovel the sidewalk, and we shoveled our neighbors, and we offered the shovel to people. And so this precious shovel was being shared amongst our neighbors. In that moment of crisis, we were the resident experts. But when it comes to understanding the significance of God's love for people, and that we are his conduits for that love, we should be the resident experts, shouldn't we? But it'll be impossible to properly love our neighbors unless we begin to receive the abundant love that God is already offering us. How so? Well, how do we love our neighbors as ourselves? Well, first and foremost, as we've read, by loving God with all of our hearts, with all of our souls, with all of our strength and minds. And remember, we do have to receive His love. And we can love our neighbors as ourselves by loving ourselves. That sounds kind of ironic, doesn't it? But if you think about it, if God values us enough to send His Son to die for us, shouldn't we appreciate how much we're worth to Him and act accordingly? We can also love our neighbors as ourselves through acts of service, by showing compassion, grace, kindness, forgiveness, even when it's not acknowledged, by being that midnight friend, that person that people call in the midst of an emergency, by being hospitable. Hospitality. Henry Nouwen said, hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. And Rich Villodas followed that up with this quote: the more we create spaces for people who don't look like us, think like us, or believe like us, the more we will be able to introduce them to Jesus. In 1 Peter, we read, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to keep away from fleshly desires that do battle against the soul, and maintain good conduct among the non-Christians." Maintain good conduct among the non-Christians, so that though they now malign you as wrongdoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God when He appears. We can love our enemies, and we can love our neighbors by loving those enemies. So, what if our neighbors are really our enemies? It happens. Who are your enemies? Do you have any enemies out there? Are they close? Are they distant? Matthew 5 says, "You have heard that it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be like your Father in heaven, since He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors do the same, don't they? And if you only greet your brothers, what more do you do? Even the Gentiles do the same, don't they?"
Psalm 82 says, "Defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked." So I have launched a project with my friend. She's an IW from the US. She works in Spain as well, and she works with North African women who have become trapped in sexual trafficking in Spain. So we've named it the Strawberry Girls, as there are women that come up from North Africa who are being promised lots of money if they come and pick strawberries for a season in Spain, and they will be able to send that money back to their families, and then all of their dreams will come true. Unfortunately, they often fall prey to modern slavers who trick them into prostitution, and thereby severing their ability to go back home. These are Muslim women. They're not part of the body of Christ. How can I love these women, most of whom I will never know? They represent the spiritual enemy of Christ. So Marcy is writing their stories, and as she gets to know these women and helps them escape, she shares the love of Christ with them, and I get to paint their stories. I get to paint their feelings, their hopes, fears, their tortures. And what we are doing is writing a book together to raise awareness. And even the government of Spain is actually interested in helping us with this, and they want to sponsor us. And we will eventually be doing an exhibition and just kind of promoting the plight of these poor women. These are my neighbors, but they are not anything that would be classified as friends. They are technically enemies. And I'm aware that this project I am working on carries with it a certain amount of danger. I mean, you don't mess with €1 billion mafia without incurring some kind of risk. And you will incur risk too when you love your enemy. And just as an aside, in the foyer when you go out, the left-hand side, there are some of Marcy's books there. And just the honor system, you can, there's an envelope there if you want to buy one, so you can start reading what is actually happening. And the money will go to funding our Strawberry Girls project. But my challenge to you today is to leverage your creativity to speak the love of God, to love your enemies, to love your neighbors.
Chuck Colson a few years ago said, if our culture is to be transformed, it will happen from the bottom up. From ordinary believers practicing apologetics and their faith over the backyard fence and around the barbecue grill. Let's bow for a moment and let's close our time here. It truly is a beautiful day for a neighbor. And I want to ask you guys a couple of questions while our heads are bowed. Are you willing to love those neighbors who don't think like you, or look like you, or believe like you, or agree with you? And what are some of the ways that you could love them? We live in this global village, and there are neighborhoods all over the place where people don't have a relationship with Jesus. Perhaps today, perhaps it's been over a period of time, God is calling you to go over there, to become part of that neighborhood, and to share your faith. Are you willing to go? And one final question. You may already have someone in mind, but what neighbor is God asking you to love today? I want you to look up, and we're going to read this slide together, and I want it to be our prayer. Let's read this together as our prayer. We love you, Lord, with all our heart, and with all our soul, and with all our strength, and with all our mind, and we will love our neighbors as ourselves. Amen. Jesus says to us, do this, and you will live. Thank you very much. We are going to be around, and all of our IWs, our superstars, are here, and I know that they will love engagement with you and talking with you, find out a little bit more about them, and they can find out a little bit more about you. If you have any questions, there's going to be a time when we can answer this and respond. So thank you again so much for your time.